everybody ready to get started? If you can go ahead and focus on the video screen, that would be fantastic.
A few summers back, me and my old lady, or my wife, we stopped by here on our honeymoon.
You got a pic? Oh, of your wife, I mean. Her name was Carrie. We were married 12 years when... Anyway.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Messiker. Oh, please, round of applause for that fantastic performance, right? My name is Andy. I am going to be moderating this panel this afternoon, and this panel is going to focus a lot on video game music, but also the differences between nonlinear media like video games and more linear stuff, whether that's film, TV, commercials, things like that. So I am a contributing writer for Music Connection magazine, so you may see some magazines littered around. Please feel free to take that home with you, check it out. And because of that magazine, I'm getting to be with this awesome panel of people here. And before I give an introduction, I just want to call out that these panelists are not just video game composers, they are full-blown composers of all kinds of material, and we're going to get into that. And I want to make sure that it's evident and clear that there's so many different forms of media to compose to, and if you guys have questions throughout the panel about some of the work maybe we don't discuss, there's a hashtag there on Twitter, PMC Video Games. You're welcome to also speak up at the end of the panel, but if you're more comfortable staying in your seat and tweeting, I totally understand that. I feel that internal lifestyle choice. I'm with you there. And so that's why we've put that there. So first here to my left is Jack Wall. Jack is a ASCAP award-winning and BAFTA-nominated game composer. His most recent work you saw there that we can talk about is Black Ops 4. To his left, we have Sarah Schachner. Sarah is an IFMCA-nominated composer and Moog synthesizer enthusiast. Definitely follow her on Instagram to see all the cool modulations she's playing with. And her most recent work that was announced on social media was her work on Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And what you saw performed there was her live performance of Anthem at the Video Game Awards. To her left, we have Nathan Whitehead. Nathan just completed Days Gone, which is available to play now. And there will actually be a release of that on vinyl soon. And Nathan also has quite the background in film that we're going to get into, including the Purge franchise, Keanu, and other great films such as those. And then last but not least, we have Jesper Kyd. Jesper is a BAFTA award-winning composer, has done several AAA titles in his career, including the Assassin's Creed franchise and the coveted Borderlands franchise. Borderlands 3 just dropped. Definitely want to check that out, especially if you have that feeling like I do. You want more loot, then that is the game that you want to play. So before we jump in and we start asking these panelists some questions, I'd love to ask the room a couple of questions. First and foremost, hands up if you are a composer. Okay, and how many are video game composers? Okay, and how many of you would say you're an active video game player? Great. So that'll help us kind of tune our answers and questions throughout this panel. So first and foremost, I'd really love to ask each and every one of you, one of the things that made me really excited to be a part of this panel is knowing all of your different backgrounds of how you joined the video game industry. So I'd love to go one at a time, starting with you, Jack, just kind of talk about what got you into the video game industry.
Sure. Hey, everybody. How you doing? Good to see you. So I started a long time ago, over 20 years ago. No, more than that, 24 years ago.
Time is a flat circle.
Yes, it is. I was in the music business, working as a recording engineer, producer, working with some New York artists, John Cale, David Byrne, Patti Smith, people like that in New York City. Then I met this girl who was in a band. I was producing her band for Capitol Records. She had a deal with them. I was really interested in this girl who was the lead singer of this band, and she was a software designer by the day, doing games and things like that. And at night, she had this band, and she was kind of putting the two together. And Capitol was interested in what she was offering, this sort of like a software component to an artist. And so I took her out for drinks and just picked her brain about it, and then we got married. So.
As you do, as things happen.
Yeah. And cut to the chase. Through some friends of hers, we got into writing for video games back in 1995. So she went off and did her own thing. She writes for theater now, and I've been doing video games ever since. So that's how I got in.
Very cool. Sarah?
Hello, everybody. My story does not involve any weddings or marriages, but I took the route of initially working for another composer, doing ghostwriting and additional music, and I did that for 4 or 5 years, and then I'd worked on the Assassin's Creed franchise in that role, and then there was an opportunity where I could demo for one of the next games in that franchise, and that worked out, and I've been doing it ever since.
Very cool. And congratulations on your 10th video game recently.
That I've worked on. Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Nathan?
Hi, everyone. I'm similar to Sarah. I came up working for a variety of composers and got to help out on some games, writing additional music, a couple of Gears of War games, and kind of the first jobs that that I got as I was leaving that phase of working for other composers happened to be movies, and then. The creative director on Days Gone heard a track from one of the Purge movies that he liked, and that kind of pulled me back into the video game world. That led to meeting with them and talking about what they were looking for, and to ultimately doing Days Gone. And it was a great experience, and something a world that I hope to spend more time in going forward.
Hey guys, I started out a long time ago as well. I'm from Denmark, and I was part of a scene back then called the European demo scene. This is something I joined when I was 13. It's a place where people who like to use home computers. We used Commodore 64 and Commodore Amiga. And so I would do music, that my friends would do graphics, and they would program, and we would do these demonstrations. And that kept evolving. We started doing music videos. Some of that stuff ended up in MTV Europe. I think it was 18 when we started our own game company and started making games for Sega. And they brought us over to the US to do more games. And so then they went back home and started IO Interactive and started working on Hitman. And that's, I did the first Hitman game and been working with them ever since, and also done a lot of other stuff.
That's fantastic. And so with everybody's very diverse timing and background of coming into the industry, technology has changed quite a bit since then. I mean, Sarah, we saw your performance of Anthem, and you had a vocoder going with an orchestra and a choir. Can you talk a little bit more about, how you merge those two types of genres in Anthem?
I just was messing around with that vocoder plugin, and I mean, I choose sounds based on how they make me feel, and um, that sound just immediately made me feel something. And I was watching a video, like a rough video I had from Anthem. The javelin, they were just like flying through the air at night. And it was so beautiful, and it just like clicked for me. And then yeah, I mean, I think everything I do, I'm combining synths and orchestra. So it's like harder for me to just do one. I like to always combine them. So it's something that feels pretty natural.
And Jesper, you brought up the Commodore 64. Obviously, technology's come quite some time since then. I mean,
Right.
how does that work for you going from project to project, and how technology is continually advancing at rapid pace? How do you stay focused in that when you're working on a composition for a long time?
Well, I try not to stay focused on that. I think if we put too much focus on technology, you can kind of get lost in that. For me, it's all about the music and what it makes you feel and how it can enhance the game. Each game I work on has a different music system. So once you start the project, you get to know the music system. But I also try to forget most of what they tell me right away, because if you end up writing to the music system, the music can end up sounding very systemic. And I think when things sound systemic, they could be better. I don't want to hear the system in place. And especially if something like Borderlands, which was by far the most advanced music system that I've heard of, it was quite difficult to try to pull yourself away from all the limitations on creativity that music system could impose if you weren't super aware of how you were writing it.
I remember you saying recently in an interview that the way Borderlands 3 works is that essentially every player is going to hear a little bit different of a soundtrack that you've composed.
Right. I mean, so the system is basically you would have like exploration music and combat low and combat high and then boss music. So they would be 4 separate tracks. But so let's say you have exploration music. Then within that track, you would have different modules. So, you would have the first minute, for example, and then the next minute would be something totally different, and then the next minute. And so you end up all these different modules that could be put together randomly in the game. And then each of those modules have 7 layers. So you have to be aware of that also. So now we're talking like, so many different ways that this music can be put together by the game. And you have to be aware of these modules working together, And I think the really tricky thing about that is when you write regular music, you would write like, let's say you'd write like the bass and the percussion, and here's the theme and here's the arrangement. And that goes on for a while, and then maybe another melody or another part comes in, but you would usually keep the same bass sound or the same drums or something. But for this, you have to keep changing everything all the time, because if it just plays that layer 7 of that bass line and mixes it up with something else and it just switches, then it's going to be, oh no, that's going to be too monotone. You would have to keep changing everything at all the times, including the drums, including the bass lines. So it was like a very draining score to write, but it also ended up, and there was no place to be lazy either, because you had to do something new all the time. You have to keep switching it up. But I think in the end, when we have these tracks and we listen to it, you have something very entertaining that is going to be always changing. And so now we have these like 10-minute tracks that we're going to have on the soundtrack that sounds very entertaining. It's like everything is an overdrive, because you're always changing things.
That's great insight. And I think a great follow-up question for that for anyone on the panel really is, how expected are you as composers to understand the different nuances from game to game and their engines? How familiar do you need to be with Wise versus Unreal versus Unity when you're really in the studio composing your soundtracks?
I'll take this one. It's funny because we've been doing a lot of panels recently. I was in Germany with Mike McCann, who also wrote on Borderlands. He showed me the scripting, the sort of method that was used. It's insane. I've never seen anything that complicated. Honestly, I don't know how you guys even wrote music to that. It was literally just like dozens and hundreds of rows of different cues inside the same piece of music that all had to be somehow, stemmed out, and it's just nuts. And then, when you change key, I can't even go there. Anyway,
just don't change key.
Just don't change the
C. Key of C.
Same tempo, same key.
There you go. That's how you have to do it, really. But to that end, there's a wide margin of people in this business who are from zero technical chops to like the most technical chops, and I could name names, but it doesn't matter. It's just there's a whole swath of people out there that can do everything in terms of scripting, and they can actually get in the engine and make it work and all that stuff. And then there's people who, get hired because of they're the right composer for the job, and they've never seen a video game before. And it's really, and over time, I've seen a very different. It was a different time when I started 24 years ago, where basically I did everything. I mean, I was not only the composer on the game, I was the voiceover director, I was the sound designer, I was everything. I did everything. And I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years into that, I started saying, you really have to switch gears to be good at every single one of those things, right? They're all really highly, take a lot of creative energy to do each one of those things well. And I found myself going from sound design to music. And it was just like shocking, the difference, and I really had to like switch
Yeah.
my brain. And so I ended up focusing on music. And then over the years, but when I was doing music, we were programming interactive sound and playback engines way before things like Wise and Fmod and these third sort of middleware that can speak to both the music and the engine that it's playing it, and do really amazing things for the game. But now, today in 2019, and it has been for a while, you've got teams of people who do that implementation. I can tell you that I did the implementation myself with an assistant on Mass Effect 2 back in 2009-10, and it took so much out of me. It was really a lot of work, and to do it well, you've got to really. It's one full-time job to compose a score, is another full-time job to put it in the game. It was really satisfying experience to have it play back the way I wanted it. And I'm fairly technical, so I was able to handle it. But I didn't work on Mass Effect 3, and it's because I just didn't spend enough time. I was so busy. I had this tour that I was doing, and Video Games Live, and and you just can't do everything. So the lesson is, I say, be a really, really good composer and find somebody else to do the implementation. Usually the companies will provide that for you.
That's very encouraging, because I think that's part of the barrier of entry that people fear, is just like, well, I'm not very technically driven, but I can compose the heck out of something. So that's good to hear that it's really the gamut
But
across.
there are companies like, I'm sure, working on Borderlands, like all the guys, you could talk to this, but I mean, those guys had to be very technical to make that work.
Yeah, but I would definitely agree with you, Jack, that it's not every project where that's required. I think, in my experience, when I start on a project, how much do I want to be involved with the interactive music system? Well, that's kind of up to me, I feel. So if I have ideas, I usually have some ideas, but it's not required for the most part. Borderlands was definitely the most complicated score I've written. But I wouldn't say it's required. Like Jack said, the audio departments have gotten so big now that there's a lot of help there, and to help you see the path there. Yeah.
Speaking of starting projects, Nathan, with your recent transition back and forth between film and gaming, I'd love to know how much time or how long did it take to score Days Gone?
A little over 2.5 years.
And what about a film like Keanu?
Keanu was more like 2.5 months.
Right. So with the
as low as 2.5 weeks. So we can just keep.
So that's I guess my question is, when you are starting a project like this, is it usually scoped out for you? Are you familiar that something is going to take this long? And also, what are the differences there when you start a film project versus starting a video game project?
I knew Days Gone was going to take longer than a film. I didn't know how long. I think there are kind of release date surprises for all projects. But I knew it was going to be a longer process. That was something that I loved about it. I like on any project, even if I have 2.5 weeks to do a feature, ideally I can have some time of of palette building or of working on synth sounds or field recordings or whatever, or even just exploring different instruments, having this time that ideally isn't too pressured to try to find colors that that just feel like the story and feel like the world of whatever it is, whatever the project is. And that was a big difference. It ended up being a big difference with Days Gone. I didn't know exactly how it would go, but there was this prolonged period of kind of just mining for. I mean, so sometimes it was melodies and harmonies, and sometimes it was just trying to find that sound world. Even the instrumentation, deciding we're not going to use any brass. Guitars are going to play a big part of it. I really loved having a much longer phase like that on the game. I didn't really know how long that phase would last going into it, but that was something that speaking of the music teams and kind of people on the studio side who might handle some implementation, that was a phase that they really supported, and that was very different from film and TV work. I mean, a lot of TV work is just trying to stay alive for 5 days and then trying to stay alive for another 5 days.
More coffee.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a really exciting change of pace in a way to get to.
So one of the things that we saw, obviously, were the 2 live performances there, and everybody here has had their music performed live at some point or another, which is super rad. And I know, Jack, you mentioned the video games live. I got a chance to see a lot of that stuff when I was coming out of college, and it created this almost rock star persona of these composers who I knew behind the scenes were these games that I love, these films that I love, but then to get to go see it live. And we were talking earlier, even like you go to a John Williams show and there's just kids with lightsabers and they're having a great time, I'd like to start with Sarah and just kind of talk about, I believe one of your interviews you mentioned when you did that Anthem live performance, it was kind of last minute. Can you walk us through what that process is like, developing a score for a video game and then all of a sudden flipping it so it can be presentable in short form on stage?
Yeah, it was. EA decided that they wanted to premiere something, and everything else at that show was like something that was already loved and being like applauded and given awards. So I was like, oh my god, I have to premiere something nobody's ever heard. Yeah, initially I was a little freaked out because it's just like, what am I going to do? And I don't typically write traditional orchestral music, and it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out how it can be presented live and still maintain what it is when it's a lot of hybrid, a lot of production, a lot of synths. So yeah, it just seemed to make sense to do the vocoder thing. Luckily it worked out and I didn't like fall or anything. But yeah, what was the first part of the question?
So essentially, just how long it took you to turn that around like that to make it a short form presentable
right.
piece?
It was like 2 weeks. We had to figure it out, and then Lauren Balfe was directing the show and helped with like getting the logistics of the choir and everything. But it was a great experience. It was really exciting, and it was just so fun to get to do something other than sitting in front of the computer alone all day.
Jack, one of the questions I had for you was, I believe it was Myst 3 where you did the first orchestra. Is that correct? Like big orchestra for a game?
My first orchestra.
Your first orchestra. How has, if at all, it changed for you working with orchestras from then for video games to now?
I'm less scared in front of the orchestra, I guess. That's the big thing. I remember the day that I was doing that recording. I was wearing contact lenses and I couldn't find them. And I had no glasses with me. And I was like, how am I gonna do this? I can't see anything because I'm blind as a bat without glasses, right? And they were in my pocket. I mean, that's just, the nerves, right? Yeah, I mean, the great thing about it is that from Myst 3 until today, I have the same team. Different orchestrators through the years, but like I still use the same people that I used back then, and we're like a family. Every time I record something, it's just a phone call, and everybody knows what to do, and it's really just it's a well-oiled machine. Not much has really changed. I mean, the biggest changes in video games, I would say, came around 2005-6 when something changed in terms of how you produce a video game, where up until that point, it's like, here's a piece of artwork, go write some music. That was then. And then like somewhere around 2005, it was like, we're going to do a video capture of a level for you. And I was like, that's the way I want to work. So we could just sit down with the audio director and we could score it like it's a film, and then we'll figure out how to take it apart and make it interactive after that. But you can actually create an ebb and flow and a story flow, and you can tell the story that way much better. So that was a huge thing for me personally, because I remember back in the early days, you'd get this beautiful piece of art, and you would be inspired to write something, and then you would hand in the music, and then the game would come out. You'd be like all excited, and you're like, this looks nothing like that piece of art that I was writing to. And so you're like, oh God, I wish I'd seen this before, because I would have written a completely different score. So that's been a great thing ever since, I guess, 2006 or so.
And Jesper, you just announced recently that the Hitman series is going to be performed live, correct? Was it?
Correct.
And so is that in Poland? Is that where they're doing that?
Yes, that's in Poland. Well, it's an entire concert dedicated to Hitman 2, Hitman Blood Money, and Assassin's Creed 2. And it's really celebrating the 10th anniversary of Assassin's Creed 2.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
One of the questions I want to ask for the audience that we have today is, it seems to be this is becoming a booming industry of live performance of the stuff that you guys composed many years ago. And I would just love to know if you have any advice for up-and-coming composers about how things like royalties, making sure that you're taken care of in those situations, or if anybody has an anecdote of how that comes to be, would be great. I know it's a tough question. So just like if you signed a contract to work on a video game, it could be that you just thought that video game was going to be accessed on Xbox and that was it.
Well, it's a work for hire.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you guys are reached out to after that to help with these, live performances, and if you have any advice for composers on that front.
I mean, I would say put a good team together. That's not new news, but I think there are a lot of confusing things in the music industry, and I think there's a lot more information available than there used to be, I guess, internet and whatnot. But finding people, I mean, agents and specific music attorneys and people who really know this industry, and there are people, especially here in LA, who might not only be, I don't know, they might not be a music attorney, they might be a video game music attorney, or at least a film centric. So like finding those people, and it can be a tricky thing, building that team, but you can do it. And I think that's essential. I mean, if I had to kind of navigate everything by myself, it would be much more difficult and more things would get missed. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that when we all met for the first time about this panel, everyone stated that one of the big benefits in the video game industry is it feels a lot more progressive than maybe working in film and TV. And Sarah, I think you spoke last year at E3 about this a little bit, and how there might be blind auditions, for example. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and how you've seen that progressiveness in the game industry?
Yeah. Well, the game industry is the only industry I've ever experienced like a blind lesson during the demo process. And I'm very thankful that that happened for me, because the very first game, the first Assassin's Creed that I was demoing on as myself, and there was a supervisor who had everyone there listen to the demos, not knowing whose was whose. And that happened to me one other time on a game. And that's, they care so much about the music, and that's just really cool. And I feel like that helps to level the playing field. It's not as much about what your credits or it is more inclusive and hopeful for the future, I guess.
That's awesome. Would you say that there are other opportunities, like one of the things that most of the people in here know with film and TV is like, hey, we just completed this thing and now you're on the music team, so you have 6 minutes to turn around all the audio for it and send it back our way, even though we've been working on it for 3+ years, right? Is there any change that you guys are seeing as far as like progressiveness, work-life balance, understanding, bringing you in the beginning? I mean, you mentioned earlier about, you're brought in the beginning, but then maybe kind of left out of the loop, and a lot of stuff changes throughout. Have we seen any kind of change in the industry on that front?
Well, I think that games are becoming more and more art, and I think especially is something I've noticed is how people are just really care about implementation. And I've worked in TV too, and it sometimes it feels like you just need to deliver something, and if somebody says it works, then you're good. You can move on to the next one, and there's this pace that just goes really fast sometimes. But I don't get that sense at all for video games. They very much care about making a piece of art, and that the music just has to be perfect sometimes. And it's great. I've had experiences where they would put it, I would send the music and they put it in the game, and they send video back, and they have, we have the level running with your music, what do you think? And you can hear exactly how everything works. I mean, there's just, all those extra steps they're taking just to ensure that everyone is on the same viewpoint, and we're all understanding what's going on. I think that's just a really awesome thing about the game industry. They just deeply care about the product they make. And of course, also when you have something you're working on for 2-3 years, if you're writing 3 hours of music, this is there's a lot of your life you're putting into this, so it's cool.
Sure. Jack, we watched some of your music from Black Ops 4, and one of the questions I had for you about that, and anyone feel free to chime in after as well, is where I really see video games being different than other mediums is there's a lot of mini games that might be within a game. And so Black Ops 4, for example, has the zombie survivor section of the game, right? And so I'd love to know if, the first one, you don't know how successful these different mini games are going to be, but throughout all the Black Ops that have been worked on, I'm curious if you take into account the idea of replay value when you're composing, if that plays a role versus the campaign of the story, knowing that I have friends who have dropped 300 hours into that survivor mode. And for people who don't know, the whole premise is survive, right? And so look, I survived 4 hours. Well, that's your music playing for 4 hours. So I'd just love to get a little bit of your take on how you compose for those types of situations.
Okay. Zombie mode for Call of Duty is there's not a lot of music, frankly, and I think that's the reason why. There's usually something up front. And by the time we get to that, honestly, we've gone through campaign, we've gone through any of the multiplayer music that I have to write, which is very little. Sort of leads packs, and everything I deliver to the client is in stems, and they're fairly wide stems. There's the main piece of music, that you hear on the soundtracks, but then there's like tons of stems. And my audio director is always like, I need the gold in your stems because I'm going to take it apart and reuse it everywhere. So basically, again, like I'm not responsible for implementing any of the score. They do all of that. And so they'll just take, there's thousands at that point, there might be hundreds of hours of music maybe, but thousands of stems that they can create new pieces of music basically from what I've done. Especially when you're talking about zombies, a lot of it is kind of sci-fi. It's more like horror or some specific genre. Like, we did 30s, New Orleans. So we did a lot of big band stuff like that, big band jazz. And they might actually use bits of that here and there, like just almost like, oh, what's that sound? It's coming from that club over there. And they'll just have like an alto sax blaring or something I did not intend to happen, but they put it in there and it works. And that's kind of how we do it.
A follow-up to that is, I feel like in film and TV, you can go to a premiere, you can watch the show, you can see your final product. Video games nowadays, there could be 100 hours of gameplay and you still haven't heard everything that you've worked on. How do you guys handle, like, do you wait for those releases on vinyl or when you put it out on Spotify? Or do you get that opportunity to then, after you're done with the project, say, all right, now I'm going to spend so many hours and kind of hear how it all panned out?
we usually do soundtracks,
We
right?
do, yeah, I was going to say soundtracks, right? So you have to deconstruct the music, and especially for something like Borderlands, where everything is written in stem, in 7 stems, and then with all the different modular systems. It was quite interesting to put it together. And the soundtrack that they're releasing, it's been announced it's going to be over 6 hours of music, you know. And that's only our favorite bits, you know, because
Right.
you know, there's still tons of stuff in there that you can't. It makes no sense on a soundtrack because it was you know, written for the music system. So yeah, that's how we work on that. You got to take some time to put the soundtrack together for sure.
And
That wasn't it.
Yeah, in my experiences, when after you've gone through like the year or 2 years of just slaving away on this project and you're just so delirious, I've always only had like 2 days to even put the soundtrack together. And so it's like you have to make sometimes 50 or more edits of finalizing how you want your work to be presented to the world, where it can actually just be listened to as music. And it can be crazy because it's like you're working for so long and then you just have like 2 days to figure it all out.
The last 2 years of your life.
Yeah. So I don't know about if your experience is a bit different.
Thankfully, I had slightly more than 2 days, but that's happened before. But yeah, just the process on video games. If you've written so much, you know, how
You hate it all. by
I
the
didn't
end.
get 6.5 hours on Days Gone. So you know,
We were more than, it was more than just me as a composer. There was like a whole team of composers.
okay, well, that helps. But you know, it's like you have spent so long on it, and you have this huge chunk of music, and the first pass. I mean, the Sony producers I was working with were amazing, and I may talk about them a little bit more. They were always just so supportive, and so supportive of what my idea was. It really felt like I was hired for my ideas, which I think is the way that's nice for composing, you know. So they wanted me to put together what I wanted the soundtrack to be, and I did. But it was kind of painful when it was like 20% too long, you know. It's just really hard to choose
Your favorite child.
so much time. Exactly. So we put so much time in, so much music. And sometimes people do volume 2s, and so maybe there's room
Well,
for
that's the thing
that.
about digital, right? You can kind of like just
Yeah, it
add it
doesn't
on if you
matter.
want. There's no limit.
You can, unless they want it to match the vinyl and everything else.
yeah.
But yeah.
Vinyl's 40 minutes of music. That's not going to cut it. You know,
A 12 disc
20
collection.
Yeah, 12 disc release.
You have
Yeah.
to sum all the bass. It's like if you bass heavy, good luck getting it on vinyl.
I actually, just interesting to hear what you guys talk. I actually think about the soundtrack as I'm writing the score because the one thing I've sort of changed the way that I do soundtracks now. I used to like put everything on the soundtrack, and I just sort of felt like over time, nobody cares about that one thing. I mean, there's always somebody who does, but this little bit, like somebody will write me and say, that little bit in that one level, and when you open the door and you turn the corner and that thing happens, and I have no idea what they're talking about, right? And I'm like, okay, so everyone, there's a lot of people who do care about every little sound you do, but I feel like I sort of curate as I do the score, and I'm like, that's worthy of a soundtrack, and I'll just put it in, and I'll make notes like, okay, I'm going to need to edit that section out that's just, you know, repeating or whatever. And then it's pretty easy because we have like 2 days to get it done. So that helps me get it done.
No clarity in those 2 days because you're just like so
A
burnt
zombie
out.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that became a bit of a hot topic last year, there's a YouTube channel, Every Frame a Painting, and they did a bit on temp scores in film and TV. And it really blew up and opened up eyes to a lot of people of how sometimes composers can get pigeonholed into what the temp score was because the director gets attached to that. And Nathan, you had spoke about how, you know, the best case scenario is when you get hired for your ideas, you know, that let me do what I think works here. So I was just curious from a video game standpoint, if temp scores are also ever a concern, if that ever happens where, you know, they're married to an idea.
I don't have that happen, I must admit. I don't think I've ever had a project where they had a temp score or even any temp music. I mean, if you're going down the path of you're trying to figure something out and you're like, okay, let's be creative, let's take all this time to experiment. And let's just say it's, you know, for some specific moment, it goes horribly wrong or whatever. But then you talk more about it and you find out, oh, it's because they have an idea already how they want it to sound. And you're trying to figure that out. And then you're like, Well, just tell me the idea. Just send me the music. Oh, that's what you. But outside of that, there's no temp music is not like a thing in the game industry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they might, in the beginning, they might say, hey, let's do something. They might have suggestions about the kind of music that they want in the game or they think they want in the game. But most people are really interested in what we have to say because they're just interested in doing something new, Whereas, television, I work in TV as well. And, a lot of times temp score can really be helpful because you don't have that much time and you know what they kind of like this and they'll tell you what they really like and they'll say this temp score is like in the spotting session they'll say this is great but can you change it's completely wrong or whatever. Can you do something new? But yeah, I think in games it's really not a thing.
Okay. To change up pace a little bit, in Music Connection last year, we were very fortunate to do a panel, well, a bit of a panel, more of a roundtable on video game composing for people who maybe are in college for composing and interested in video games. So everybody was asked the question of what's your one bit of advice, right? And Gareth Coker was one of the people we interviewed who's done Ori and the Blind Forest, among other things. And his bit of advice was if he could have gone into a time machine and talked to a younger Gareth, he would have said, make sure that you get credited for your work. Make sure that you have written in the contract that if they ever release this game music, that your name is actually attached to it. And he said that today he's fine, but in the early days, it was just a matter of, you may not be working for a whole lot of money, so you got to make sure you get your credit. I was curious if you guys had any thoughts on that, and I'd love to go one by one to hear if you have any one piece of advice that you would give up-and-coming composers, whether it be film, TV, or video games. I'll start with you, Jack.
Really, me? Okay.
Apologies.
It's funny. I've never had trouble getting credit, but I have a great agent right there.
Step one, get a great agent. Got it.
Not always easy in the beginning. I guess, and I'm sure everyone here would agree with this, is that, we're artists and we're business people. On the artist side, I would say, find your voice, try to be creative and try to make it, try and make a long career by enjoying what you do and not always trying to rip off someone else. On the business side, I would say, it is a business. Longevity means, I think you alluded to a question about royalties. I discovered royalties, 6 years ago when I started doing TV. It's like we don't have much in the way of royalties in games, but there are opportunities to make some royalties. Mechanical royalties and Spotify and all that kind of thing. That's a reality. Although so you need to create something in your contract, and we work on that. We work hard on that, making sure that when ancillary products come out with our music and they're streaming somewhere, we're actually going to collect something on that. So the business side is really about being smart about how to, if somebody's going to use your music outside of the game, it's a work for hire. I think you said that. It's a work for hire, which means, you don't get a royalty on the game, but you still retain your writer's share, even though, and that should be in your contract as well, of performance royalties. So if you want to collect those performance royalties, they'll come to you directly from your PRO. If you want mechanicals, that has to be paid through your contract. Okay, that's a different revenue stream when you're talking about Spotify and record label, because there is no buying music. Really, buying music is a very small piece of the music business in terms of when people are just listening to the soundtracks. So the real business is streaming now. So you want to get a piece of that as well. And those are the two sides of the coin. You really have to be both a business person and an artist.
Awesome. Sarah, if you were to go back to game one and had advice for yourself, what would it be?
I agree with Jack. I think the most important thing is developing your own unique voice and not trying to copy what's cool or what other people are doing. But also just being good at collaborating with people, because you're working with very large teams and on games that are as big as the ones we've all worked on. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of people you're working with. And I've kind of learned over the years to be less precious about what I write. And games have taught me to be able to take a step back and like, you know what, if this ends up sounding different than I had originally intended, maybe I'll like it better. Just kind of loosen up about it all. And it actually helps me to approach film and TV a little better, because sometimes you can get so zoomed in and kind of in the toothpicks about it, and just being able to kind of take a step back and um, be able to collaborate, be able to mix your ideas with other people's ideas, and be okay with your music changing and not always being exactly what you had originally thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's really good advice. How about you, Nathan?
I mean, this is all great stuff we've heard so far. I mean, sometimes when people say there are a lot of questions about how to get started, so that that might not be exactly the question you ask, but I do like to say that, you know, you have to persevere, you know, write music every day or whatever. You know, you just keep going. It is a tough business. It's a competitive business. And I think most of us, it just feels like this is who we are. We need to do this. And I think it's important to listen to that and just know that there are challenging seasons and there are less challenging seasons. And, you know, I'm a composer, I'm a musician, this is what I do. Keep at it. I also add that I think this is becoming less important maybe right now, but generally at some point in your career, it's going to be helpful to be where jobs are. At least when I started, it was helpful to be here in Los Angeles. So if you can identify, if you have an idea of what you want to do, you know, there's probably a way to get a little bit closer to that. You know, my experience has been, and like Sarah was emphasizing, collaboration. That's so important. I, you know, can look back to so many just amazing collaborators that I've learned so much from, and I think you need to be willing to do that. Maybe it means moving across the country, maybe it doesn't. But if you can target what you have, you know, in mind that you want to do, find a way to get closer to that. I know people who said, whatever, I want to be a director, but I'm going to do it here, and I'm not going to do it, you know, whatever. I'm not going to move to Hollywood. I'm not saying you have to do that specifically, but I guess to try to be a little more concise with it, there are a lot of people who can share knowledge and help you. Be open to that, and you can usually find those people pretty easily. And especially in the video game industry, it seems like people are really willing to share knowledge and experience that they've learned.
I think that's a great answer. And I think one of the things that really stuck out to me too in the beginning, you just kind of grazed over it, but was continue writing every day. Like keep flexing that muscle. Don't get so inundated in the business side that you haven't gotten a gig, that you're just looking for gig, and you're forgetting to write music. That's really great.
Yeah, and like Sarah said, you know, finding your voice. I think about trusting my gut a lot, and some of the things that I've learned over the years. My best moments of kind of mentorship have been where we haven't been talking about music. We've been talking about storytelling. We've been talking about the way we feel. So like listening to that and realizing if you're feeling something, then probably the gamers are going to feel it too. And I think the more we, you know, doing that every day, I think helps me clue into, okay, that feels cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna send this out and see what everyone thinks. And the more I can identify how I feel about it and trust that, then the better the music is. It's usually received much better, you know, when I feel that way.
That's great. Jesper, you're in a time travel machine. You're going to your Commodore 64 friends, and you're like, hey, don't do this.
Well, I don't know. I don't really have any big regrets, and I agree with everything has already been said.
Sure.
I mean, I'm the last. Everything has
Yeah,
been
I
said.
set you up for failure there. That's on me.
But I do have one thing I want to add, and it's not something that I think about every day, but it's something that I think is worth mentioning too, is don't be afraid of failure, you know? Like, this is a tough business, and, you know, if you are not got some thick skin for some, some failure, you know, then it's perhaps not for you, you know. And I also mean that in ways where you're experimenting with music, and people come back and you feel like you sent this music and it's listen to this, it's crazy, right? Yeah, it's way too crazy, you know. And
Great
but
thinking.
that, and you know, that's a failure, right? But it's not a bad thing, you know. Going too far is always like for me is always my best you know, those kind of comments I treasure, because you know, toning things down is for me a lot easier than to going too far, you know. So I always think so maybe there's some advice there. Try to go too far, you know,
that's great.
and then tone it down if you need to.
Take it to 11 and then bring it back down. Yeah. I'd like to open it up now to questions to anybody in the room. Just get a hand up and I'll call on you. Otherwise, I'll go to Twitter. Anybody have questions? Right here in the front.
I guess it's a compound question. Early in a composer's career, maybe specifically for video games, is it necessary to have an agent? And if so, what's like a good way to go about getting noticed by an agent?
I don't think you need an agent in the beginning, because the agent, you know, I think when you need an agent is when you've got you've actually started your career and you've got somewhere you need to go, and then they can help you get further. I think what you need to do is keep writing and try to get into something that is going to. Cause it's only because it's so competitive. I don't mean to say we don't need anyone doesn't need an agent, because it'd be great to have an agent, but I don't really see an agent being able to do much for you if you haven't done your you know, the first bit of your career on your own. I think everyone has to kind of get to that point.
So,
Yeah, and to add to that, I think what you were hinting at, but just to bring it out some more, I think it's important that your music is at a certain place. You know, if you feel like you're learning, and in 2 months your music is twice as good, you know, and in a year you're like you're feeling you're learning so much, you know, I would say make sure you're listening to other music in the same genre as well, a similar genre, so you can kind of get a reality check of where you're at in your learning process. And because you know, you want to make sure that you have a certain quality of your music, you know, and write music every day, you know.
Sarah, you were gonna add on to that?
Oh, I was just gonna say, isn't there some saying like an agent will find you when you need an agent, or but I have also known of agents at certain agencies that will kind of like mentor people before they're ready to take them on, but will like help out or like for like one-off contract deals or something. So that is possible to happen when you're early on.
I think I saw a hand up in the second row. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's worth noting that if you're on a project for 3 years and you write, let's say, 2 hours of music, there's definitely a lot more than 2 hours of music in me over a course of 3 years, you know. So you can make room for other projects, so you can make room for other things. Sometimes maybe there's 3 months before they get back to you and say, all right, we're ready, let's go forward, because the game is further along now. But other than that, I mean, there's different ways. Sometimes you work on a map of music and then you get paid for that map. You know, sometimes you get a upfront payment, you know, sometimes it's installments and milestones, maybe, you know, 3, 4, 5, depending on
It's
the
usually
amount
an
of music.
upfront payment, milestones, final payment. That's how it works.
And that's something you can negotiate as well, you know, usually.
However you like to, I like to say, you know, how do you like to work? And you can sort of talk to, you know, in terms of when they're going to need music, you kind of figure that out. You kind of look at your schedule, and you can kind of be in the process of how that works out, you know, to be both in your favor, because they want you to be happy. I mean, you know, nobody wants you to starve to death while you're doing this project.
Yeah, I was surprised how thoughtful everyone was about that. You know, I've even had producers say, you know, everyone's aware of the milestones, and Jesper's exactly right. You know, there is room to do to kind of stay busy in other areas when you're working on a video game. And then ideally, and this is my experience, everyone's just aware of that. And you know, if you're, for whatever reason, the order of your work that you're composing this music, you wind up 9 months between milestones. Sometimes they're like, oh, we see what's happening here, and they want you to be okay. They want it to be a comfortable situation. So I thought it was nice that they were paying attention to that and can even help you cross the milestone. Someone's moving things around, and it could easily go unnoticed in a giant corporation. Oh, hey, the composer hasn't been paid in 18 months. And you can call on your team at that point, hopefully to call some attention to that. But I also thought it was just wonderful that some of the producers I got to work with were just very mindful. Say, no, we don't let musicians go 18 months without getting paid. That wasn't this person's job. But it's something that is nice, and I think that is kind of representative of a lot of the cool people in the video game industry.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to add to that is like this is where an agent's really important, because
Yeah.
you don't want to talk about money with your client. You just don't. That conversation is a creativity killer. It's just terrible. It creates a vibe that you don't want. And if you can have that's where, if you're young and you're starting out, that one-off contract with an agent can help, if they're willing to do that for you, can help build your relationship with that agent as well. But also, I wanted to also say one thing that was really important to me in my early career, and is still today, is the upfront payment is important, because it's my favorite part of the process, where not getting money, but literally just kind of meditating on what you want to do as an artist, and what you want to, the palette of what you're gonna, the instrumentation, and it's just a really creative time for me. And it's nice to have that upfront payment that sort of like says, okay, you can now go and start. That's an important thing.
And we have time for one more question. I see back there in a hat.
Oh, I have something weird. On Assassin's Creed Origins, I sampled an otter that was screaming on Instagram. He was like demanding food or something, but I pitched him down and stretched him out, and he happened to be singing the Middle Eastern mode, and I was just like, what? How is this possible? So yeah, he has like a solo in one of the investigation tracks, and he's suing me because I didn't credit him.
The otter is suing.
Yeah, the otter is. I'm in litigation with him, but yeah, I love sampling weird shit.
Well, thank you everybody on the panel today. We really appreciate your guys' time and your insight. It's been And I will say, as we end it, that all four of these people are very open-ended books.